There's a claim that Wagner mercenary leader Prigozhin faked his own death via a plane crash, with plans to resurface in Central Africa at a later date, where he would build a massive mercenary army getting rich off the fuel resources, only to make all of us look like a bunch of dummies. That's right, Prigozhin just played us like a damn fiddle. Oh, wait, never mind, that's just the plot to Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain. Now, when the crash happened, the internet did what the internet does and started making memes. Lots and lots of memes. The pilot, after seeing Prigozhin on board.
What the That's gonna kill me! That's real!
Now that the dust has settled on this incident, what evidence is confusing some people into thinking that Prigozhin faked his own death? If Prigozhin was killed by Putin, what does that mean for the remaining Wagner forces? What changes has Russia made to deal with the valuable empire Wagner built from Syria to Africa that helps fund their war in Ukraine? I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Let's find out. But before we get into that, I want to tell you time is running out. The Ridge Wallet Hennessy sweepstakes ends September 30th, so you still have time to enter to win the Ford Bronco of your dreams. It's absolutely free to enter. All you have to do is swing over to ridge.com/taskandpurpose and enter to win before it's too late. And if a fully loaded Ford Bronco for some reason isn't your thing, no worries. You also have the option to win the equivalent grand prize of $75,000 cash. That's a lot of cash. And if you do prefer cash, speaking of which, Ridge Wallet's sleek and modern design has room for plenty of it. You see how many ones I popped in there? Purchasing the Ridge X Hennessy collaboration wallet keychain bundle or other custom Hennessy products can come with up to 1,000 additional entries. They're giving away 10 bonus entries at checkout to all of you. Just use the link ridge.com/taskandpurpose and drop the code taskandpurpose to get 10% off as well. Remember, time is running out, so hurry over to their website and enter now. These rumors of a fake death were further fueled when this video dropped a week after the crash. Prigozhin told everyone in the video that he was safe and sound in Africa. It might surprise you to learn that this is in fact not the first time Prigozhin was assumed dead from a plane crash. In 2019, Prigozhin was reported to be on board a plane in the Congo that crashed with 8 people on board, only to wind up alive and well a few days later. But that was under very different circumstances. He hadn't just put himself at the top of Putin's hit list at the time after a short-lived mutiny attempt. Here's what we know for certain. On August 23rd, a private jet owned by Prigozhin plummeted from the sky on its way from Moscow to St. Petersburg, inside of Russia. There were no survivors of the 7 passengers and 3 crew members listed on board. A pre-published manifest of the passengers was the most reliable source to identify who was on the flight at the time. Take a look at these 2 jets. Can you tell them apart? Maybe you can if you're an aviation sleuth. According to Reuters, both these planes are linked to the Wagner group, and both were flying identical routes the very same day and time that one crashed. RAO 2795 never made it from Moscow to St. Petersburg, as we know, with Prigozhin aboard, but according to flight data, RA-07248 completed its round trip. The operating company of the second aircraft said that there was no connection to Wagner, but this is contrary to other Russian media reporting. This has led to wild speculation that Prigozhin was on the other plane that didn't crash. We also know that Prigozhin thought of himself as a master of disguise. No one could match his stealth craft. When Russian authorities raided his offices in response to the June mutiny attempt, leaked photos showed multiple passports of Prigozhin under different aliases, wigs, and selfies of Prigozhin in disguise. We also know that he employs a body double, and allegedly, multiple people changed their names to Yevgeny Prigozhin to help hide his travel and location. The first question that comes to people's mind is, why did Prigozhin seem so certain he wouldn't get knocked off when everyone from President Biden to the collective consciousness of the internet were equally sure that it would happen? Prigozhin likely overestimated his importance to Putin and thought he couldn't be replaced. We have to understand that from inside Russia, many people believe him to be a national hero, akin to something like how General Patton is viewed as a hero in the United States. Not a perfect analogy, but what I'm trying to say is that he might have believed that his street credit would protect him. Meanwhile, the Kremlin had spent the last 2 months changing all their Wagner Venmo passwords so they would have no problem wiring money from their accounts in Africa. For more evidence of Prigozhin's demise, we look at the investigation into the crash. Proof that those listed on the manifest were in fact the ones killed on the plane hinged on DNA tests done by Russian authorities. People who doubt Prigozhin's death might see this as evidence he's tucked away in some bunker somewhere. Russian authorities blocked any independent verification of their results. And Russian authorities immediately bulldozed and flattened the location where the aircraft crashed, which is exactly what you think a criminal might do if they had the unlimited resources of a state behind them to hide their evidence. A spokesperson for the Kremlin said, in this case, there can be no talk of international aspect, which I believe means they're not going to involve international nonpartisan investigators onto the site. Not only this, but according to Al Jazeera, quote, the Interstate Aviation Committee, IAC, which oversees aviation accident investigations in a grouping of the former Soviet republics, including Russia, said it was not investigating the crash, adding that it would not be commenting on the circumstances of the incident. So I personally believe that Prigozhin and the other passengers on the plane are very likely dead and very likely were taken out by Putin. If Prigozhin is indeed still alive, then the recent video released of him in Africa doesn't look like good evidence of it to me. It appears to have been taken prior to the crash and uploaded after the fact. Analysts also point to the fact that his family is still in Russia and his money is still in the bank. Two things you probably want to take with you if you're faking your death. The reason the Russian state is keeping a tight lid on the crash, fueling these rumors, is likely an effort to obscure how the plane went down, rather than who was or wasn't on it. It's in the Kremlin's interest to leave this an open question and let people draw their own conclusions that they were behind the assassination.
Bottom line is, no one's going to get in trouble. Nobody should feel sad at all.
Theories about what might have caused the crash have already gone viral and circulated the internet faster than that trend to eat Tide Pods. The British said the Russian FSB targeted the plane. Wagner Telegram channels labeled the crash as an assassination, and they said that it was a surface-to-air missile fired from the Russian Ministry of Defense. This lines up with eyewitness accounts that said that they heard 2 explosions before seeing the aircraft go into a flat spin. American intelligence discredited the use of surface-to-air missiles. They believe some sort of bomb was placed aboard, but the one single argument that rises above the rest, the cream of the crop that takes the cake, comes from Russian state media, who blames Ukraine. Here we can see clear evidence of Zelensky himself preparing for the attack. As to the theories of what brought down the plane, we may never know for sure. What's more important of a question at this point is answering, now what? To understand the impact of the crash, we have to look at the 10 passengers aboard. Part of what makes this event horrible is we might think that this plane was piloted by mercenary Wagner pilots, when in reality, Putin was likely willing to allow collateral damage to take out his enemy. For all we know, the crew of this plane were not members of the Wagner group. They were innocent victims of this crash of a private chartered plane. Pilot Alexei Levshin was a 20-year-old veteran of the Russian airline industry. His co-pilot, Rostom Kemerov, was only 29, the youngest on board, and was only 3 months into the job. Flight attendant Kristina Raspova was 39 years old. Aside from Prigozhin, there were 7 other passengers aboard. Dmitry Ukin, who is said to have Nazi ties in their second-in-command, experts assess that Ukin was an equally difficult blow to the stability of Wagner as Prigozhin. Ukin, a GRU, basically Russian CIA Special Forces veteran, was attributed as the tactical mastermind behind Wagner paramilitary operations. The next on the food chain taken out was Valery Chekalov, Wagner's logistics chief and manager for the economic mines and shell companies in Africa and the Middle East. His losses would largely impact the ability for Wagner to generate funds from their massive collection of gold, oil, and gem mines inside Africa and Syria. If you're interested in learning more about Russia's role in Africa, we have a video linked here and in the description. His loss comes at a critical time for Wagner, who's currently on the lookout for ways to further exploit recent coups across North Africa. The remaining 4 passengers were also all Wagner members. Reactions from the Russian people on the ground might seem strange from an outside point of view, and I like to call them the Prigozhin paradox. Memorials were erected, and people paid their respects to Prigozhin. But there's a video of a woman walking down the streets in Crimea ripping pieces of Prigozhin's photograph up after she smashed a nearby memorial of him. Reports indicate that she was arrested by Russian police for vandalizing Prigozhin's memorial. Think about how strange that is from an outside perspective. The Russian police are protecting a monument to a man who led a mutiny attempt and was likely assassinated by the Kremlin. Many Russians responded by saying it's both a national tragedy and that it's a good thing. Prigozhin is both loved and hated at the same time, the Prigozhin paradox. This is explained a little bit by the Battle of Bakhmut and the 2022 Ukraine invasion, which made the Wagner Group and Prigozhin a popular figure among Russians. However, in June 2023, Prigozhin's 2-day mutiny forced Putin to stop speaking highly of him and condemn him as a traitor and enemy of the state. Since then, much of the population appear to be kind of unsure about where to stand with Prigozhin being a hero or a traitor to them. You can see the hostility from the Russian state against Wagner happening in real time. This viral video was filmed by a Wagner veteran on his way to visit some of his fallen comrades. When he arrived, he found that the city workers removed all of the 200+ grave markers from a Wagner cemetery and piled them up like garbage. Later, however, Wagner Telegram channels offered an explanation that the city workers were only doing this to, quote, renovate the cemetery, not to erase it. However, from the video, it appears that the manner in which the grave markers were removed and graves leveled, that it will be impossible to know which fallen fighter was buried where. Another reason for this seeming contradiction is the fact that, in a public statement, Putin expressed sympathy for the crash and called Prigozhin a quote-unquote talented businessman who made serious mistakes in his life. He did not attend the private funeral held for Prigozhin and clearly didn't want anyone else going either. Instead, police and National Guard deployed to multiple cemeteries, closing off access to the public, and totally confused this CNN reporter as to where Prigozhin was actually buried. The heavy police and military presence surrounding the burial of Prigozhin and Ukhin send a clear message that Putin is afraid that their deaths could make them martyrs and threaten the stability of the state, which could be why Prigozhin thought this wouldn't be done in the first place. While his death is being quietly hidden from sight, Putin is also forcing the remaining members of Wagner to sign quote-unquote loyalty pledges to the Russian Ministry of Defense. With Putin's 2024 election quickly approaching, Prigozhin's death is, I think, a clear message to other would-be challengers that there is only one president and leader of Russia. With their leadership now gone, what is the future likely to hold? In Ukraine, the shift in main effort from private military companies to Russian military troops started months ago when the Russian military started to expand and get more conscripts. Towards the end of May, Wagner forces who had paid the lion's share of blood in Bakhmut began to be replaced by Russian soldiers. On the 20th of May, most of the fighting in the town was finished, and orders for all Russian private military companies in Ukraine to be fully absorbed into the Russian Ministry of Defense by the end of June. Instead, Prigozhin, of course, chose mutiny. This action only hastened the closure of PMC action in Ukraine, with the majority of Wagner troops suddenly redeployed to Belarus to train local security forces. In Syria, Reuters reported that Wagner commanders were forced to either sign military contracts or leave immediately following the June mutiny. With the construction of Russia's foreign military port, Tartus, Wagner had for years been shrinking its role in Syria, and now acts mostly as security guards for Prigozhin's captured oil fields under the shell company called Evropolis. This example could be a signal for how Russia is reorganizing Wagner. With regards to Africa, Kimberly Martin, a professor of Columbia University, suggests that the GRU representatives were already meeting with key leaders shortly before Prigozhin's plane crash. Many people wondered why it took Russia so long to take out Prigozhin. After looking at the sheer vastness of the shadow Wagner empire and what it controlled, I can kind of see why now. By taking their time to plan out how they would divide up the business, as well as meet with state leaders that work with Wagner, Russia could then guarantee more stability after they cut the head of their own snake. So who from the Russian state could be replacing Prigozhin? Right now, most reports point to a man named Andrei Avrevyanov. Andrei is the head of a secret GRU unit known only as Unit 29155. According to the New York Times, this unit is responsible for carrying out high-profile assassinations in Europe, and Andrei is even suspected of planning and carrying out Prigozhin's death. According to some reports, Andrei attended Putin's Russia-Africa summit at the end of July. This summit was also attended by Prigozhin, who likely was trying to prove he was still worth keeping alive after the coup a month earlier. But looking at the facts afterwards, it appears like the summit could have acted as a form of turnover for Prigozhin to Andrei. Right now, it's doubtful that many Wagner troops would rise up and avenge Prigozhin's untimely death, no matter how badly the CIA or Ukraine honeypots them. Meanwhile, Russia actively positioned themselves to take on a more direct role with international partners that were once only loosely linked via the Wagner Group. If Russia was forced to send conventional forces to replace Wagner in Africa, it could prove difficult to manage competing priorities in their war in Ukraine. This isn't an ideal time for this hiccup for Wagner, because currently many African nations are rejecting Western security support, calling for France to leave Niger, for instance, and they're looking for Russia instead. This puts Russia in a difficult position. A man by the name of Pikolov is another leading figure in the Wagner Group. Critically, Pikolov is thought to run Wagner's Africa operations. While working as a leading figure in Wagner, Pikolov also began his own PMC called Convoy to assist in Africa operations for the Russian state. Convoy came about in November 2022, and according to a France 24 report, was developed by the Russian state to counterbalance Wagner's monopoly on the region. This could give you an idea of how long Russia has been thinking about Wagner's power as a threat, and exactly how long they've been planning for Prigozhin's death. But what does this mean for Ukraine and the United States? There are both benefits and drawbacks to the event. The benefits are pretty easy to see. The Wagner Group was an organization that not only was in direct conflict with Ukraine and with US interests virtually everywhere they operated, but they were also accused of committing brutal crimes against humanity. The death of their leader signals the slowing down of their operations. In Africa, a wave of anti-democratic coups in countries with known Wagner Group presence presents the United States with an opportunity to make political gains in the region while this Russian group is off balance. However, cutting off the head of Wagner is like cutting off the head of a weird Greek Medusa monster that just grows more heads. While Prigozhin seemed competent at running Wagner, at the end of the day, it was really Vladimir Putin who was calling the shots. With Prigozhin gone, Putin gets an opportunity to reshuffle his leaders and place certain operations back into the shadows. Killing top Wagner leadership and breaking up the organization will also make it more difficult to hold individuals accountable for the many crimes and human rights violations that the group is accused of. What do you think about Prigozhin's plane crash? Now that the key leaders of the Wagner Group are gone, what is your assessment on what Russia will likely do? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy, and if you like this video, please consider checking out this one about Wagner Group in Sudan and how it's having a ripple effect through the world. Thank you, and I'll see you guys again in a couple of days.